Cheers, my friend.
Well, cheers,
Welcome.
yeah.
Hi, I'm Devin. This is As If by Design. We're here to talk about freedom today.
Something that I feel like, as a person who spends way more time on a motorcycle than most, am very qualified to talk about, even though I ain't exactly a professor.
Well, we're going to get metaphysical today. We're going to talk a little bit about what freedom might mean. All sorts of ways of thinking about freedom. Now, when you're on the open road, you're usually not thinking about like whether or not it's possible for you to be free. You just feel free out there in that
that's the
moment.
whole point of motorcycles. Is, of course, it's overused. Everybody knows that. Everybody on a bike knows the whole cry of freedom. But ultimately, it is there. It's a place where my life is completely my own. I am completely alone, experiencing the rush of movement and the sounds of my machine. And I might be sounding a little cheesy, but I 100% mean it.
Well, hey, I mean, I think that that's something that we all experience. When you're out there in the world, when you're in it, when you're doing something that you love, like you're out there on the open road especially, the feeling of freedom is undeniable. And there have been authors that have talked about that primarily. Especially you go to existentialism, mid-20th century. This idea that the feeling of freedom is the thing that we should listen to most of all. You be in good company. This idea that whatever we're about to talk about next, all these arguments that might make you skeptical of the idea of freedom, the first position we can talk about is called libertarianism. I'm sure you're familiar with the idea of libertarianism in a different context.
The guys that'll put pig farms next to middle schools. I'm very familiar with libertarians.
Now, you don't have to like that form of libertarianism to like this type of libertarianism. The idea is that we know that we're free, we can feel that we're free, so determinism, this idea that you are determined to act in some kind of a way that makes you not free, that must be false. So there's this guy, French guy, and we don't have to hold that against him. We could.
That's cool. I would love to travel the French countryside on a motorcycle. A bit of champagne and cognac and some very stinky cheese enhances my own personal freedom experience.
Well, Sartre was definitely known to partake of those things. He's one of the few alcoholic philosophers.
One of the few? I would assume they all were, Deb.
No, I mean, actually, a lot of them were big, like, teetotalers.
I trust them less.
Sartre, he said, the call of the void can let you know that your freedom is real. That not only that feeling of driving along the open road, but, like, if you ever go up to a cliffside or, like, look down off a steep embankment and have this feeling of, like, I could just vault my motorcycle over the guardrail.
Yeah, I just got goosebumps. So I'll say as a joke oftentimes, I'll be like, I am completely free. I could walk outside right now. Of course, I don't have to do it outside. I could do it on camera, attempt a backflip, get about halfway there, and break my head all open. That's freedom, and certainly that's what motorcycles feel like. You know, there is the isolation from outside influences, of course, like turn your cell phone off, nobody can get at you, you're using all four limbs, you're completely into what you're doing, staying alive. But even by saying staying alive, certainly there is that fear of death, that I have chosen to be on this machine and I'm allowed to do this, and therefore, since I am flirting on the edge of death with this machine that brings me so much joy, yeah, that's exactly what I would call freedom.
You can feel it too. You can feel this sense that at any moment you could do something totally unpredictable. Like I can just go like, oh, I'm gonna take my glasses and throw them off, or I'm gonna throw this beer on you, or something like that. And that shows that I'm free.
I could predict what would happen after that.
Well, we'll talk about that. The idea that you could throw yourself off the cliff, that's one of the things that Sartre pointed out, that he said, look, you know that you're free. You could never deny it. It absolutely has to be the case.
Yeah, I can end myself.
Yeah.
And flirting, being close to that, reminds me that I'm free.
That you can make a radical break with your past at any time. There are a number of arguments that have been advanced over the years that might make you doubt it. Some of them you might be more sympathetic than others. The most basic version that goes back like forever is the idea that if God knows everything, doesn't knowing everything entail that he knows everything that's going to happen in the future, as well as everything that happens now?
All part of the plan.
If he knows everything that was, is, and ever shall be, then that means that he knows what you're going to do.
Part of his plan for me to fail at a backflip. Possibly.
It might be. Now, let's say you're not sympathetic to the idea of God. This guy Laplace, after Newton and after people had started to like explain the universe in terms of these laws, this idea that there was stuff and then there was force, that there was matter and then there were laws that governed it. If it's true that everything has a cause, if it's true that everything is caused to happen in some way or another, then that means that my actions presumably would be part of nature. They would be part of whatever it means for something to be caused. If
there's a plan anyway, I think I'm going to start riding my motorcycle way faster. If it's going to happen anyway, might as well fun till I get there.
Theoretically, if you knew the position and velocity of every particle in the universe, like you could take a snapshot and map it down to the atom in every case, then like theoretically you could predict what's going to happen next. You could predict what's going to happen next from there and from there and from there. You're made of atoms. You're made of cells. Every one of those is made of molecules. Isn't there some sense in which on some level you would have to be able to give an explanation on the level of molecules, on the level of atoms for like what you're made up of, and therefore like where you're going to go next, what's going to happen next?
I think beyond so the obvious thing that tells me is like then I don't have free will, which cannot comprehend. Top of that, I think that that would be so beyond my ken to understand how atoms work that it might as well be chance anyway.
Right, and that's a reasonable next point to bring up is like, what about chance? Like, what about quantum mechanics? Quantum mechanics isn't deterministic, so this Pierre-Simon Laplace guy, like he's operating on this old model of physics where everything is determined to happen by some sufficient prior cause. But in quantum mechanics, there's this probabilism, there's this, there's this sense in which it's random. But here's another thing to consider. It's still going to be the case that if you're ever going to give an explanation about anything that happens in reality, and we're not going to invoke God, we're not going to say that your consciousness is some extra ghostly thing that inhabits the machine of your body. You're a body, you're a physical organism, you're an animal.
That's right, baby.
I think that you would be sympathetic to that idea. So, okay, psychology, your beliefs, your desires, your intentions, you want to explain those things, you're going to have to go down a level of organization. This is the idea of how explanation is tied to what's called causal reduction in philosophy.
I feel like I've given quite a good explanation of freedom, Devin. I think it's your job to tell me why I didn't.
Well, here's the thing. If you're going to explain your psychology, like beliefs, desires, intentions, you're going to have to go down to neuro processes. You're going to have to go down to the level of neurobiology, the way your synapses are wired together, the things that have made your brain the way your brain is, and then the way your brain functions. Yeah. That's going to be the thing that explains beliefs, desires, and intentions. But then if you're going to explain those, now you're going to have to go down the level of organization to cells. You're going to have to talk about what those neurons are doing, how axons are plugged into dendrites.
I'm not doing. You can stop. I'm not doing that. Listen, I like to get a close look at a lot of things on the human body, preferably not my own, but never down to the cellular level, I'll say.
Not a pretty level to look at. I mean, I don't know about how pretty my cells would be to look at.
Well, I think of somebody that I take a peek just for science.
But okay, so the idea is you have to descend a level of organization if you want an explanation. You want an explanation for what the brain is doing. You can't just talk more about neurons. You have to talk about the molecules those neurons are made up of. You have to go down that level to chemistry, to microbiology to be able to talk about that. And then if you want to ask questions like, why does that molecule interact with that molecule? Why does, that neurotransmitter hook up to that part of the cell? Now you got to start talking about fucking electrons. You got to start talking about valence shells. The more you ask why, every time you ask why, you have to go from psychology to neuroscience, from neuroscience to cellular biology, from cellular biology to chemistry, and then from chemistry finally all the way to physics. So, okay, maybe physics is fundamentally indeterministic. Maybe quantum mechanics and chance are down there. But still, it would seem like the picture we just painted would suggest that all the causality is still somehow at this bottom level of organization, that all of these other levels are dependent upon it causally. So randomness down at this level, is that freedom? Can that be something that you then somehow harness, take up, and make yours? Now, it's not just the fact that there's randomness in the system, but somehow you're the one who's in charge of that randomness?
Well, I would say this. If there's randomness in the system, on a subatomic deep cockle level, it can be predicted in some way. I still have to make those things happen. I still would say that I'm harnessing my freedom in the best way that I know how, and if it can't be explained to me on a subatomic level, I'll say it again, Devin. It doesn't really matter.
What really matters then is that you act on reasons, right? That you have reasons for doing what you do.
Right. I have reasons for the freedom. I have reasons to seek it out.
All right, here's another angle on it. If you're acting on reasons that make sense, that you could articulate why you did this rather than that, doesn't that amount to another form of determinism? Doesn't that mean that you're going to do what you're going to do? If everything that you do is sufficiently motivated by a set of reasons that you could articulate, could you really have done something else? Or does it mean that the very fact that you are rational means that there's another sense in which you're not really free?
I'll tell you this. If somebody says go right, I'll go left. Until I think they want me to go left by saying go right. And so I'm starting to get real suspicious where this line of talking is going.
See, but that would
Sure.
just be another reason. Like, if you were to try to demonstrate your freedom, for instance, if you were to say, I'm going to make a radical break with my past. So, like, you
Right.
tell me I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I'll crash my career into the ground right now. I'll drive my motorcycle off the
Sure,
embankment.
I'll dump the beer on you first.
If you're doing that for the reason of trying to prove some point about free will, doesn't that mean that you are still motivated in a way that somebody who even knew your psychology well enough would be able to predict?
I would say, now that I know that, maybe not. I'm armed with new facts now. I would say check, but it ain't checkmate yet. All right. Okay,
No,
I'll listen to you. I'll listen to you.
No, I'm not.
All right?
See,
I'm
that's,
being forced into my freedom.
that's the whole
You
thing.
know?
Is that these are just some of the worries that people have. I'm not even trying to say like this is the right way to think about it. I'm not sure that it is.
So all this molecular nonsense behind, like I said, not only do I not understand it, I don't want to. Okay, I'm happy where I'm at because right now, push that stuff aside. Doesn't make sense. Don't like it. Regardless of any of that, I am the author of my own story. What I decide freedom is what it is because that's what it is. No matter what's happening down on the subatomic level, crawling around on my skin, it doesn't matter. I know I'm doing it.
So it doesn't matter if those filthy particles are pushing you around or if you're pushing them around. We can leave
I
that
am
behind.
yes.
You're the author of your own story.
Yeah.
You're a self-made man.
I would give a couple shout outs in the credits, but for the sake of the argument, yeah, I like the sound of that.
Some people have looked at it this way. If you're responsible for who you are this year and who you were last year, who you were, choices you made when you were 30, right?
Mhm.
Like become relevant to who you are now. But who you are when you were 30, determined by who you are when you were 25. And we can keep going back, right? We can say
Sure.
like at some point you were 12 and who you were when you were 12
Allegedly.
was determined by decisions you made when you were 10. But how far back can you go? What if you go back to when you were 5? When you were 3, like you were responsible for who you were then?
I
Or-
would say probably a little less so. I mean, maybe on an individualistic level, like I probably said some stuff in class when I shouldn't have. Grandparents who raised me were probably a little more influence on me than maybe I thought I did. I'd like to remember it like I was in charge, but if I'm being honest,
See, this is another
Maybe
way of
not.
looking at it. That, like, you don't even have to think about particles and causality, which can be pretty abstract for some people. But like, this is one where if you just think about how genetics and parenting, at a certain point, is kind of like everything. You take it all for granted, at least until you're like 3 or 4 or 5 or something like that.
yeah.
And so then whoever you become when you're 8 years old, 9 years old, kind of dependent on some of those values that are instilled in you at that stage. Can you ever really feel as though you're the ultimate author of your actions when this huge part of who you are is ultimately determined by all this stuff that eventually is not in your control?
Sure, I can. Absolutely, I can, because while I never forgive, I do often forget. I don't remember who had an influence on me. Isn't perception reality? Devin?
Blessed are the forgetful.
I think I'll have another beer.
All right, so these worries that we're talking about here, they can all kind of broadly be grouped under the idea hard determinism. This is a camp of incompatibilist thought. So we talked about libertarianism. That's a form of incompatibilism. They say free will and determinism, they can't go together. They're
Right.
never the twain shall meet. And so do the hard determinists. They say, here are all these ways that you're determined. Therefore, you're not the ultimate author of your actions. You're not really free.
Yeah, if it has to be, then you're not free.
There's a whole other different way of looking at it. It's called soft determinism, also sometimes called compatibilism. Yeah, no, you're a softie in some ways.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, in some ways,
you might like it.
You treat me the right way, and the softness goes away with the quickness, sweetheart.
Some people love compatibilism, some people don't love compatibilism so much. Immanuel Kant famously said it was a wretched subterfuge. He thought that it was.
That's a turn of phrase.
Yeah.
A wretched. I can't wait to bust that out on someone unsuspecting sap.
It's like late 1700s for this is bullshit.
Yeah.
He said basically, this is not really freedom because compatibilists try to say, look, you're determined in all the sorts of ways that we were just talking about, but also you're free. So there's this way in which you're free, even given all that stuff. They talk about freedom in a number of ways. Then you got to ask yourself the question, like, is this enough? Because the compatibilists want to say, yeah, this is enough. You should be happy with this. But some people aren't so convinced. Compatibilists say, look, you're not being coerced. And to the extent that you're not being coerced, to the extent that you're not in a cage or somebody's like not holding a gun to your head and being like, hey, do this.
Right.
Like, you're free. to a certain extent.
I would say I'm not even having a gun held to me by my past. I still feel pretty free when I jump on a motorcycle, and I can even remember wanting a bike when I was younger. I can certainly say some movies I saw or seen people on motorcycles ripping around probably influenced my particular choice for expressing my freedom, my instrument of freedom. But in that moment, I will still say that I am choosing freedom. I am on the bike, and while it might be setting on top of some other ones, I might have to just say the same thing I said about the molecules, man. I just don't care. I'm not thinking about it in the moment. And since I'm not thinking about it in the moment, how true can it really be?
Well, that's what David Hume said. He was one of the first compatibilists, and he said exactly that. His way of trying to dissolve this dilemma was not to say, look, here's the argument as for how you're not causally determined in all these kinds of ways. Instead, what he said was, these arguments don't have any force. They just don't do much. You can entertain them in the philosophy lecture hall and get really worried about it, and then eventually you're going to have to go home and decide whether you want tea or coffee. And
does David guy go on to do anything? He sounds freaking awesome, dude. I like his style, man.
I like David Hume's style too. And I think that there's a certain extent to which he's right. That whether you buy into these determinist arguments or not, it's not like you could go, oh, I see I have no free will, so I'm just going to let the universe impose on me whether I have coffee or tea. You still have to choose.
Yeah, and my choice in the moment, I'm not going to think about what happened when I was 8 when I make that choice. Dude, I'm just making the choice.
Is it really up to me, or is it is it that somehow my past conspires so that even if today is the day that I decide that I'm going to have tea for the first time in years, that somehow it's always going to be that way? The laws of the universe made it so that it couldn't have been otherwise unless some other cause had been changed at some point in the past. David Hume wants to say nobody thinks about this, including philosophers.
Therefore, it is not so.
Not even that it's not so, but that just get over it.
Yeah, shut up, dude.
There's a big current of shut up, dude, in David Hume's
there
philosophy.
We go. David Hume. Shut up, dude. I'm in, man. Consider me a humist.
we say Humean in the discipline, but yeah, I mean, I do love David Hume. Okay, so that's couple of different compatibilist kinds of approaches down. The idea with compatibilism is that you say, sure, maybe there's only one future. Maybe things are going to go the way they're going to go because causality and all that kind of stuff. But don't worry about it so much. There are other forms of freedom that are worth having. Here's another idea. There is a 20th century philosopher draws a distinction between what he calls first order desires and second order desires. He says, freedom is the sort of thing that can evolve over time. Different sorts of creatures get more degrees of freedom as they get more sophisticated. Beings like us, we get to have more than just a desire, like a dog has a desire. A dog wants to do X, Y, or Z. I want the ball. I want some food.
Sure. At some point, instead of motorcycles, we just had to run real fast. Maybe jump off something.
Be able to, fell a deer or a pig at some point.
Just being like, this is pretty exciting. I feel pretty free right now.
At some point, also, we gained the ability to have desires, not just about what we want from the world, but desires about our desires. You can have a desire about what you want a desire to be. So, think about somebody who smokes cigarettes and goes and has the human wherewithal to go, I wish I didn't want a cigarette.
Sure. I can put that in motorcycle terms. It's like I get on the bike and all of a sudden I find myself doing some pretty dangerous shit that when I get off the bike, I'm like, I wish I wouldn't do that. I wish I had a little more self-control when it came to microdosing the void and maximizing my freedom in ways that ultimately might take my freedom of breathing away.
Now, is there anything that you don't have a desire to do that you wish you did?
Work out,
Amen.
I don't know, read books that didn't have dragons with tits, or was it tits and dragons? Anyway, I have desire. I wish I desired to do things that I do not do.
We have this ability that probably a dog doesn't have. A dog has desires, but a dog can't be oh, I wish I didn't need the wet food. I wish dogs don't have desires about their desires. We do. Also, there's an extent to which that could be a certain type. It could point the direction toward a certain type of freedom that has nothing to do with causality or your history or whether reasons are determining. There's just the idea that you could have a desire to quit smoking, for instance, and then either be able to exert some kind of a pressure against inertia, the inertia of habit, to be able to get control over it, to be able to crush that pack of cigarettes and throw it in the garbage and never look back.
Could this be like, there are plenty of people who wish they had a motorcycle, who watch the videos and they're learning about them. They wish they had a motorcycle so they too could experience freedom. And honestly, I wish they did too. I wish everyone got to do this. It's pretty nice. So I'm feeling the same thing, maybe in a less negative way. I wish I had more so I was more free instead of I wish I could not do this thing.
For this whole conversation about first order and second order desires, what it really comes down to is like how much can you act on a second order desire to bring a first order desire to a different place? If you were to make the decision to start working out, or if I were to make the decision to start working out, like to what extent can we actually do it? To what extent can you actually, because you're gonna have to push back against a certain kind of inertia, that habit or lack thereof, there's an inertia associated with that. You gotta push. That's the experience that we have of willpower, whatever that is. There have been some authors who have said, there's the thing right there. To the extent that you can exert willpower, that change a second order desire into a first order one. Because what happens? If you change a habit, at first, you have to exert all that effort. You have to push back against inertia. But then, if you start doing it every day, every week, month after month, a couple of years goes by, you get to a point where now you want to work out. Now it actually becomes a thing where the second order desire changes the first order desire. The same way that like if you crush that pack of cigarettes up, you throw it away, how long do you have to actively resist smoking before you get to a point where you just don't want it anymore?
Well, I'll tell you, all you smokers out there, you can turn that cigarette habit into a motorcycle payment and experience some freedom very quickly. I don't know, man. I guess it's, trying to relate it back to my preferred way of experiencing freedom is how hard do I have to work to get the motorcycle I want with which to express my freedom. Personally, I try to never buy a motorcycle cost more than $1,500 so I don't have to work that hard. Work being the antithesis of motorcycles in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, that's completely fair. Okay, so we talked about libertarianism. We talked about hard determinism, we talked about soft determinism or compatibilism. Those are all just different ways of thinking about free will, but what you're talking about now is the relationship between like freedom and achievement, freedom and self-actualization, right? And that's a whole different angle on it. There have been authors who have written about this recently too. The idea that we used to live in societies of control where people would try to tell you, you can't, own that kind of motorcycle, or you can't ride in that kind of way, or you have to get this kind of job, you have to fit into that kind of position in society.
My cold, dead hands, baby. That's what I say.
So you are a new kind of pioneer in the sense that you do all sorts of things that leverage this new flavor of freedom. What about the idea that there is hidden within this new society of achievement, this new idea that you can always be increasing your brand, you can always be doing something more, you can always be taking this extra adventure, you can always be finding this opportunity to make a story of something or to monetize it? That becomes its own form potentially of unfreedom, because there have been authors who have noted that this direction is where we're going with society, not this you must of the old control societies, but this you can, you should, all possibilities are available to you, and you gotta hustle. You got to keep doing more. You got to keep
I can see myself falling into that trap. And believe me, I've thought about it, especially since I'm able to turn my favorite way to express my freedom into somewhat of a living. Making my money in a few different ways, but I would say that motorcycles took me to all those places. Easily, I could say that. My entire network is built off of people who ride. And certainly I say with YouTube, there's got to be a halfway point there, because when I think about making videos, I think about making videos on a motorcycle, I always think, yeah, I should be filming this. But sometimes that pushes me to places I never would have gone. And I will I wouldn't have done this very exciting thing had it not been for the impetus to film it. That's pretty neat. I like that.
You get some freedom from that, and that's undeniable. But I've also seen, candidly, since I've been here, this sense in which you also have a long work schedule. You have a lot of obligations. It can stress you out. It can bring you a lot of anxiety. That is worth noting that this new way of living in a way that's very free involves to a certain extent becoming your own slave driver. That you kind of, you internalize the whip, that you don't have a boss breathing down your neck, but it's because you have learned to play both roles. Society has enlisted you to be the person that is cracking the whip against yourself.
So if you're going to be your own boss, you might as well be a good one.
Yeah.
But, you know, I will say I'm not always a great boss to myself. Certainly, I make myself work harder when, to be honest, I'd rather just be riding motorcycles.
That is the very point that these authors bring up, is that in the old days, you had a control society, you had a boss breathing down your neck, but then also you get to leave work. You get to leave it behind at some point, whereas both you and I work in these kinds of careers where that job has been outsourced, or rather insourced, to us. You're never done. You're never free from work.
True. You can always do more.
You can always do more. And that's the thing. You can do more. This is the way in which, yes, we can, becomes its own kind of cage.
I don't like this. Go on, but just let you know that I'm freaking on high alert for your bullshit. Dude.
If you want to read about this, one of the big books that gets talked about in is Byung-Chul Han's The Burnout Society. The idea is that we are experiencing record levels of burnout, depression, anxiety, and narcissism, he says. And it all has to do with this way in which society has reoriented to say, you're the one who's responsible for your own destiny, and you can always be doing more. You know, you can never spend that moment relaxing in bed. You can never spend that moment watching a movie, because you can be using this very moment to be making more of yourself.
That's hard to argue with. I will say this. If you're here from my channel and all you do is watch my videos, if you just go by that, then all I'm doing is riding motorcycles and having a good time. And certainly I love doing that. But I often say I'll work 80 hours a week to not have a 40-hour-a-week job.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes it ends up going down like that. But I don't know. Doesn't that just make the time I do spend free that much more sweet? I guess it would just go the other way too, then, wouldn't it, though?
Yeah.
Less sweet, but more of it?
That's the thing. I mean, I think that if anything, what this shows is just that freedom is a difficult concept to get your hands around. That you can feel free out there on the motorcycle, and that might actually be the most important thing. Like if you're gonna listen to David Hume, maybe, you know, being out there on the open road, just feeling that freedom, maybe you don't need anything more than that. Maybe you don't need to worry about all this stuff.
I certainly don't while I'm on the bike, you know. Oh, well, depending on how fast I'm going. If I'm stuck in traffic, I'm thinking about a lot of stuff.
Definitely, if you start to try to think about it, you start to really cash out what it means to really be free. Not as straightforward as it first looks.
Yeah. I mean, thanks for you haven't ruined it for me yet. We're well along the road to that. I'm hoping that there's some sort of silver lining at the end of this where it comes back around. And you're like, actually, you are free, Josh. You've always been a real boy.
Well, you can believe the compatibilist arguments. You can talk about, you know, acting on second order desires, changing those bad habits into good habits. You can think about just not being coerced. You can make peace with the idea that you feel free and that's all that matters, even if all these forms of determinism are true.
So I guess that wouldn't make it true freedom. And that's kind of a bummer, because that's often how I express it and how I think about it. Like, this is real freedom. You know, you just explained to me that there's a lot of trappings there. Which is fine. I don't have to think about them, Devin. I can put them out of my mind. You know, Pandora's box is not all the way open yet.
I'm gonna make him lose sleep tonight. That's the idea. That's what philosophers are always trying to do. We just want to fuck with you and make you lose sleep. That's the entire point.
Well, when it comes to what I think about, philosophy is going to have a knockdown, drag-out fight with tits. A beer break. Again, so in the bathroom, thinking as I often do after making room for more beers.
It's one of the best places for it.
Thinking about how do I make this dude shut the hell up? What I ended up thinking about is that, I don't know, you're kind of ruining freedom for me, man. And all I could think about was that, like, oh my gosh, am I actually free? I had to pay money for the motorcycle I ride. I had to work really hard for that money, and I want another one, and gas costs money, and hotels on the road cost money, and that takes work. And I don't know, man. I don't know if the freedom equation is necessarily working out in my favor right now. I'll be honest, it's just kind of bumming me out.
Well, I mean, that's all the constraints that we experience in a society. There are still ways of taking those up in a way that can make it yours, you know, and you've done that very much in your own life, is taking up these kinds of possibilities that society makes available to us, having to earn money, maybe having to internalize the whip and, you know, in the achievement society, all of these things, but that you still live in a society, we live in a society where we can then take the fruits of our labor and make of them what we see fit. That we can live very different lives, value very different things. And
is it freedom though? Like it's just like I have to make the token with which I buy freedom.
Yeah.
And so if I didn't buy freedom, I don't have to make the token. Right? I mean, if I just go like, I don't need freedom. Well, I don't know, man. I'm like, if I just got rid of all my motorcycles, I wouldn't have to work as hard.
Well, there you go. And I mean, that's the kind of radical definition of freedom that was like embraced by people like Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson. This idea of like to really be free would mean like getting off the grid, like getting rid of all my possessions, move into the middle of West Virginia.
Sounds laborious.
Like live in a cabin. But I think that it quickly becomes clear that like that way of thinking about it too, the idea of like, well, real freedom means not having to be dependent on anybody or anything.
Well, you still gotta eat.
Yeah, and you're gonna maybe run into some problems with that.
Yeah,
if you feel like total lack of interdependence equals freedom.
I know people from West Virginia too. If you go out there with your high fancy thinking and try to live in a cabin, you're gonna run into a lot of problems. Love my West Virginians, by the way. I would do fine there. I don't know about Mr. fucking Emerson.
I always think about the Lemon Hope episodes of Adventure Time, where the character kind of has this radical idea of freedom as meaning setting off completely on their own, getting outside of society, living on the margins, completely defining everything for themselves, and quickly finds themselves in crisis and, you know, not able to lean on anybody. Just completely would have died were not for somebody to have stumbled upon them.
So I got to make tokens is what you're saying. I have to make tokens for just so I don't have to freaking fight a bear for my meal. So if I'm going to have to make the tokens anyway, I guess I might as well buy some freedom from the company store while I'm there. I guess.
Look, we don't have to be too bummed out about it. Like there are all sorts of ways in which maybe you're not as ultimately free as it first looks. Like maybe you're not ultimately causally responsible for your actions. You're not responsible for the movement of the particles in your body. You're not responsible for the initial conditions of the universe and for the laws of causality. You're not responsible for who you were when you were 3 years old. You're not responsible for the way that society is organized and then the fact that you have to arrange all of that around money. But you are responsible for actions in the sense that you're responsible for your beliefs, desires, and intentions. There's this guy, Daniel Dennett, he wrote a book called Freedom Evolves. The idea is that just because you and I are complicated animals, gotten more and more complicated over the course of a long unfolding in evolution.
Pretty simple, but I'll take your word for it.
There are more and more degrees of freedom that we can model different kinds of futures. You can steer towards certain kinds of futures that you foresee coming, steer away from other kinds of futures that you see coming down the pike.
Still thinking in motorcycle terms. I can choose not to ride off the cliff.
Yes. Yes.
But it's available if I want it.
Literally and metaphorically. Yeah. You can prevent yourself from running off the cliff in all sorts of ways every day. Dennett put it like this. He said, why build a house right next to the ocean? The history of accounts of free will has been people trying to say things like Sartre said at the beginning. I'm radically free. I'm completely undetermined by my past. Causality ain't got nothing on me. Like genetics, forget about it. I don't want to hear about it. Social influence, parental guidance, all of that is underdetermining. Dennett says what we really have to do is take a look at the tides, how they go in and out, and ask ourselves, how far back do we need to build a house? What kind of an account of freedom is going to be good enough to be worth wanting and also not demand some kind of magic?
Sure, I can think about that, because to be truly free in the way I've chosen to express freedom, I'm still going to call it freedom, would be to get rid of everything I own, set out on my motorcycle, and never look back, which would invariably not be forever. So I gotta check myself a little bit and be like, a little bit of freedom is a treat. Maybe come back and do some work because I want to experience it again later.
I'm sure it would last longer for you than it would for me. That I would end up riding off that cliff unintentionally.
Yeah.
Pretty
You would have to learn how to ride the motorcycle first.
quickly.
I feel like I'm getting there. It's been a roller coaster ride, by the way. I mean, I don't know. Can it even still be called freedom though, or is it just enjoyment now?
Yeah, I mean,
Am I just I'm buying an enjoyment token and I'm calling it freedom, or I'm cosplaying my freedom, dude. I am in a freedom play on the open road on my motorcycle.
well, that was
and what's the fucking difference?
Kant's worry, man. That was why Kant said it was a wretched subterfuge.
I'm using that on somebody, dude.
That was exactly it. And that's what a lot of people say about compatibilist arguments like Dennett's and like Hume's. That they look at it and they say, well, is that really an answer though? Are you telling me how I'm free, or are you just really kind of doing a little kind of sleight of hand, like a Jedi mind trick on me?
All right, we're going to put it like this, because I'm still trying to digest this and repeat everything you said in a way that makes sense to me. We'll go ahead and put out there that maybe freedom isn't freedom. All right, I'm willing to accept that, and maybe it's something else. Maybe
Freedom isn't free.
Yeah, definitely not if you have a motorcycle payment. So freedom isn't free. It's a couple $100 a month, actually, for 6 or 7 years. Okay, it's just enjoyment, but it feels like freedom. I'm going to go ahead and call it freedom. That is how I like. That's what I want. I want to call it freedom. And so you would say maybe one of your fancy pants dudes from France, whose name I don't remember, would be like, that's actually not freedom. You had to pay dearly for that. You have to work harder than what you got back. But if I say it is, and I'm enjoying it, and I have chosen to mete it out an inch at a time, so I get to enjoy it for the longest part of my life possible, I'll go right back to what's the fucking difference. We're going back to David Hume. That's the only guy's name I remember. I think I like it.
Well, hey, I mean, it's as good a place as any to end things, because Hume would just say that after this conversation is over, we go crack open another beer, all this stuff goes out the window.
I'll tell you this, man. It's I just got goosebumps. That's freaking so lame. But I'm like, it has made me it's made me think about how I buy my freedom tokens, my freedom experiences, how I pay for them in a slightly different way. And I'm probably gonna have to spend some time thinking about it, but I think that it could make me treasure it a little more when I think about how dearly I have to pay to enjoy what I call freedom. I'm not even saying this for the camera. I'm literally just trying to really like vocalize how I feel right now, and I think I might treasure it a little more dearly.
Well, hey, I mean, check it out, because there are some ways of then going to a place that's still optimistic about it, even though it involves some thinking in a not so optimistic way about some aspects of our society. Byung-Chul Han's Psychopolitics and Byung-Chul Han's The Burnout Society, great resources for thinking about this weird era in capitalism that we live in, where more and more of us are becoming our own bosses and getting acquainted with the hustle.
Freedom. Yeah, I can't go back now. I guess you could choose not to follow me, and maybe it's not as free as I thought, but I'm stuck here now, so I'm still just going to think I have freedom. I'm thinking about freedom more, and I think I would like to know more. I don't know how many of these guys I can actually, whose stuff I'd be able to understand, but I will say, if any of my audience is here, I'm probably on the same reading level as you guys are when it comes to philosophy. We've got all of them. We get all types in Shade Tree Army, but give me a recommendation for something that is in this vein that will help me understand how I'm not free while also making me appreciate freedom a little more. That is readable.
If you want to look into some reading that is about how to cope with this new era that we're entering into, this new way that we're governing our lives as more and more of us are becoming our own bosses, I would look into the works of Byung-Chul Han. Specifically, he has written Psychopolitics and The Burnout Society, which are both about this kind of way that becoming your own boss is not necessarily the step towards freedom that it might first look like.
I'm going to ask you to pick one or the other, though, because I don't want to have to choose, because I have decision paralysis.
Burnout Society.
Burnout Society?
Yeah.
I'm going to pick up Burnout Society. I assume there's not a lot of sword battles in it?
No, there might be one.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll be looking forward to the whole... No, I will. I promised Devin before this that I would do some philosophical reading because he has promised me that he will hear about motorcycles and learn about them. And I think that's a pretty damn good trade-off because you didn't know, we've been friends for many, many years and we have wildly different interests. We are completely different people who, if you described either of us to someone, would say those guys would never even know each other. Yet here we are, you know, over 2 decades of friendship. I'll read a little bit about thinking if you read a little bit about bike. Or well, you don't have to read about them. You can experience it, but that'll be in a different video.
Yeah, hell yeah.
If you're here from the Shade Tree Surgeon channel, I appreciate you giving my buddy Devin, and as if by design, a chance. I promise you, if you enjoy my videos, you might have to work a little harder to enjoy what he's going to offer, but it's something that I treasure very deeply, and I think you should subscribe and stick around for it because he's got a lot of cool stuff planned.
If you were just here to hear about freedom, this has been As If by Design. I'm Devin, and there'll be more videos coming over the next few months. Thank you so much. It was great talking to you, Josh.
Absolutely, man. Oh, shit.
Oh, fuck.
I guess we'll end it there.